morning. Please join in singing our gathering hymn, Bind Us Together. Welcome everyone to worship at First Unitarian Church here in Portland, Oregon. Our mission is to nurture the individual spirit and together work toward the beloved community. After the service, you are invited to join fellow congregants for a virtual social hour. The QR code will appear after the service that you can use to join the social hour, and I hope to see you there. Along with this beautiful fall weather, our congregation is enjoying the seasonal transition, meaning fall programming is back and running. This is just a reminder that after a short hiatus, our Friday Vespers services are continuing, as well as our Monday Loving Kindness meditation gathering. You can find more information about how to register and join these events on our website. Once again, we welcome you. This morning, Reverend Tom will light the flame of our chalice on the chancel. I invite you to light a chalice or candle at home if you have one and wish to do so. We are Unitarian Universalists. We light this chalice in faith, in hope, and in love.
words of Sombanfu Some. Community is the spirit, the guiding light of the tribe, whereby people come together in order to fulfill a specific purpose, to help others fulfill their purpose, and to take care of one another. Come now and let us worship. Please join as we sing together, rank by rank. Please join now in our responsive reading, Your Gifts by Rebecca Ann Parker. Your gifts, whatever you discover them to be, can be used to bless or curse the world.
The mind's power,
the strength of the hands,
the reaches of the heart,
the gift of speaking, listening, imagining, seeing, waiting.
any of these can serve to feed the hungry.
Bind up wounds,
Welcome the stranger.
praise what is sacred, do the work of justice or offer love. Any of these can draw down the prison door, hoard bread, abandon the poor, obscure what is holy, comply with injustice, or withhold love? You must answer this question: what will you do with your gifts? Please join now as we sing together our doxology, Spirit of Life.
Each week in our service at First Unitarian Church, we share our offering with an organization whose mission is aligned with our own. This church year, we are focusing our giving on climate justice initiatives that use innovative solutions and an intersectional lens to support communities most vulnerable to the impacts of our climate crisis. This is our last week in September, the month when we are giving our shared offering to the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy's Disaster Relief Fund. It is a joy to contribute to GCCLP's mission of advancing structural shifts toward climate justice through social, economic, and political systems. To share your offering this morning, you may click the Donate Now button on Boxcast or use the QR code that will soon appear on your screen. Your generosity is deeply appreciated. Each week, we make space in our service for the concerns of our community life. As a reminder, you can send in prayer requests to be held by our ministers and lay ministers to prayer@firstunitarianportland.org. If you have an intention to name here, send that to parishconcerns@firstunitarianportland.org. This week, we would like to uplift the marriage of two friends of our church, Virginia Archer and Josh Peak. They were married this past Friday at a small ceremony with family and friends in White Salmon, Washington. Will you pray with me now? Spirit of life, we are ever grateful for the ways that your presence gives us energy and strength. We are grateful for the gift of love, for the way hearts can be bound in holy partnership, and for the gift of loving covenant, binding our communities together. Great Spirit, we see your work in the changing of the seasons, and are grateful for the wisdom of autumn, this moment in the year that can hold both energies of summer and winter. In this time now, there is space for energy and action, a new life made possible in the shifting wind. Yet, we are also asked now to keep turning inward, to seek a quietness and a closeness that will hold us in the months ahead. We are grateful for this abundant time of both and, when the last of the tomatoes are witnessing the first of the squashes, when sunflowers begin to turn away to make space for dahlias. Spirit of life, Spirit of abundance, we ask that you be with us today, especially with all of us who seek justice and beloved community here in this world. May we be attentive to the work of today and committed to resting in the movement for the long haul. May we dream big, work hard, and know when to seek you, Spirit, when we need a moment of rest. May we remember that our best communities make space for not only diligence, but also grief and joy and generative conflict too. Spirit of life, Spirit of both and abundance, thank you for the ways you reveal yourself in our lives with this turning of the season. May we practice turning with you. May it be so. Amen. And now, let us hold a time of silence together. Please join us in singing our hymn, Blessed Spirit of My Life.
We
Our reading this morning is Mary Oliver's Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of rain are moving across the landscapes. Over prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
I learned early on in ministry that the covenant between minister and congregation can be mysterious and complex. It was early in my time here in Portland. I was certainly trying to figure out just what in the world it meant to be a minister. I had been to theological school. I had been in churches all my life. I had heard the call. But newly settled in this congregation, I was still very much trying to figure it all out. I was in the grocery store one day. I think it may have been in the produce section. I noticed this person who seems to be checking me out. I don't recognize them. I go about my shopping and continue to notice this person noticing me. Finally, the person approaches. She looks down into my cart and then she looks up at me. Her eyes grow wide. She puts her hand on my arm and says with a mildly astonished voice, "You eat." Well, this revelation didn't seem like it should be much of a surprise to anyone to me. After a little conversation, I came to understand that this was a fairly new member of the church, and her experience of me up until that day in the store had been to see me up here on this chancel in my minister robe. She had not imagined that I had a life outside of the church, let alone a life that included eating food. As the story unfolded, I think I managed to not say what was going through my mind, something like, "Well, duh, of course I eat." Every minister will tell you about times they have come face to face with the expectations that come with the role. Every minister will tell you that they've had the experience of someone coming up to them in the line after a sermon and saying, "When you said so-and-so, it changed my life." And you're standing there thinking, "But actually, I didn't say that." Most of the time, you don't say anything because you know that the person got something that they needed, and it may not really have much to do with you. That part of ministry can be a little humbling sometimes. I've come to learn over time that ministers have a particular role in a congregation and in people's lives. A minister can come to represent some combination of parent and God, maybe even a dash of first-grade teacher. Getting angry is generally frowned upon, as is swearing. One colleague learned that the hard way at a Habitat for Humanity build when they hit their thumb with a hammer. Let's just say that the whole building area suddenly got really, really silent. Mostly, it's a great privilege to be in the role, but those expectations and all that comes with them, usually unspoken, that part of it can be a challenge. That may be why that day years ago in the store has stuck with me. You just can't always know what any day in the produce section is going to bring. Our spiritual theme this month is covenant. The simplest definition of covenant that I've heard is to simply say to come together. And there are many dimensions of covenant in a community like ours. There's the covenant among and between congregants, how it is we pledge to be together. There's the covenant that lives between the church as an institution and its members. What promises are made there? What is the mission that we all look towards living out together? And it felt like an important time to make space this month to talk a little bit about what the covenant means in the lives between ministers and congregations, especially at this time as this congregation looks to Reverend Bill's retirement and the calling of a new senior minister. Reverend Bill said a couple of weeks back that indeed ministers and congregations at their best grow together and call forth the best in each other. And that is very much true. At their best, ministers and congregations are in a kind of dance together. They do call out the best, and sometimes not always the best in each other. Ministers are the visible leaders of a congregation for a time, but then they leave the role and they also need to step away from the congregation, at least for a time. They need to make space for the ministers who will follow. It is the congregation that then becomes the continuity. This congregation has tended to have long relationships with its ministers. That goes way back to the beginning when Thomas Lamb Eliot, when he arrived here at age 27 in 1867, and was here mostly for the rest of his life, well into the 1930s. That was the beginning of that pattern of long ministries, something that Eliot and the rest of his family are actually known for. You may not know this, but there's actually a group of congregations in our movement, this one included, known as Eliot churches, that have certain characteristics of how they are together, including those long-tenured ministries. Now, I have at times wanted to put Eliot and others on a pedestal. He was a very important leader in the life of our city, and I think he did get this congregation off on solid footing. But pedestals, we learn, can be inherently unstable. Cindy Comfer, our church historian, has been helpful in putting Eliot's work and ministry in the context of his time and showing the ways that he didn't always get it right. Eliot came from New England stock, and he had a view of the world that was common among Unitarians at that time. It was a view that put his class, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, at the top of a hierarchy. Eliot may have been ahead of his time in some of the ways that he ministered to many people that others wouldn't here in Portland, but definitely not in others. That was certainly the case when it came to Native Americans who were here first, and others, most of all African Americans, who were seen as anything but equal. Now, especially as we come to understand more deeply the role of white supremacy culture all around us, it's important to look at our own history through that lens. It's hard to look forward if we can't have a fuller understanding of our past. That history and the way we tell our story needs to be a living thing. And that's how it is with some larger covenant that is part of that story too. How the ministry of a congregation is a work in progress, a living thing. It's not just the story of accomplishments, but the story of how they, and sometimes we, can fall short. Those stories tell all of the good things. That can get pretty well established, but sometimes it's important to relearn, to retell the stories from other perspectives. Reverend Bill and I have wondered at times what the Eliots would think about an African American and an out gay man leading the church in this present era. And before that, a divorced woman serving as senior minister. Could they have imagined? Sometimes when I despair about how slow progress can feel, I have this mischievous image of one of those forefathers at least shifting a little bit in their graves, if not turning over altogether. Times change. People change. But that essential covenant is something that lives on through generations, through people. It is a kind of striving. There's a line in the hymn we sang earlier in the service, "What they dreamed be ours to do." But I think maybe there also needs to be what they did be ours to know and to understand. Ministers and congregations grow together side by side, and while it would appear that it's the minister who's telling the story most of the time, in fact, the story that's being told, being lived, is being lived by a whole congregation. Maybe that's another way of looking at that covenant, the telling of a story of a community of people. Yes, ministers in telling that story bring their stories into that narrative of the community. Their identities, our identities, come to shape the identity of a congregation from one generation to the next. When I was called here as an out gay man a little over 25 years ago, I'm not sure I appreciated that it was all that big of a deal for the congregation. But back then, the church hadn't had a lot of out gay voices in its pulpit. Queer folks, I'm told, in the years before that, kind of got the message that, well, you're welcome here, but you're not too welcome here. But then the church went through a kind of transformation when it wrapped its block and declared it a hate-free zone and welcomed deliberately lesbian and gays particularly in. That opened a door that I think I was invited to walk through some years later. But at the time, I didn't know that, I don't think I really had an appreciation for that. Looking back, I think I was probably more anxious about my orientation than most of the good folks here in the church. Mostly, I got the message that said, yes, we are with you. That's the part where congregations play an incredible role in making space for their ministers to succeed. Now, it would be easy to want to romanticize all of this. One of the things I've learned in these years that change does take time, in particular, real systemic change. And part of that change is the realizing that with change, we can come things that we have to sometimes give up. It means being open to shifting cultures and really noticing who has a seat at that proverbial table, but also who does not. Change can be hard, and it means we may not in the process always be kind to each other. A few months into my ministry here, I had a board member, an older white straight male, tell me that indeed I was not welcome here. He said in fact that with my arrival, all the straight men in the congregation had left, which was quite a statement, I thought. Clearly, my so-called gaydar was not as accurate as I thought it was. What I eventually learned in that situation, which is so often the case in ministry, that it really wasn't about me. I think I represented for him some new reality that maybe he wasn't quite ready to accept. But I've also learned that that is how change, how growth for individuals and for communities happens. It means a willingness to be together even when things get uncomfortable. It means making a space where growth and challenge and change are possible. It means recognizing the privilege that some of us have. It means making a space to see who is welcome at that table and who is not. It means willing to see ourselves as part of that new, retold story. It was not long after Reverend Bill came here that he decided to put up a Black Lives Matter banner prominently on the front side of the church. This was before you saw Black Lives Matter signs quite as prominently displayed all over the city as we do today. Many were supportive, many were thrilled, some had questions, and then there were a few who were not happy at all. It wasn't long before the office started getting calls, mostly from the larger community. Didn't all lives matter? What about my life? Some of our office volunteers who took those calls felt more comfortable responding than others did. We created a short statement for our volunteers to use, and over time I think we all came to be a little more comfortable and articulate in responding. It came to be part of our shared story. I believe those talking points are still there on the volunteer desk all these years later, albeit a little tattered and torn now. And the learning and the growing continues. There was a time not long ago when the use of the phrase white supremacy culture was a big trigger for many, especially us white folks, and certainly still it is for some. But in a remarkably short time, it's now part of our vocabulary. It's even now part of the narrative of this congregation. And I think that's the way it's supposed to be, making a space to learn and to grow and to change together. And I know that isn't always easy, but I don't think easy is what it's about. Yes, we've had some others, some leave, but we've had others come in. We are, as individuals, as communities within this community, as the community of the whole, very much works in progress. And underneath all of that is that living covenant that will be on this journey in this story together, with all of its questions and learnings, with all of its dis-ease and its joy. That covenant is a living thing, and one that lives and grows and changes with time. With the affirmation of the eighth principle by this congregation earlier this year, the congregation has made its commitment to be anti-racist and multicultural more explicit, more central to its own work, to its own story. We talk about ministers having callings, but I've come to learn that institutions, congregations, just like people too, have callings. They have a mission and live out that mission as the present times call for. And sometimes we find ourselves in certain moments in history that are set apart. The church I was called to all those years ago was about proactively welcoming LGBTQ people into this space. And that work, we know, is certainly not finished, most especially when it comes to welcoming our trans siblings. But the church of today is at another kind of juncture, centering the voices of Black and brown and indigenous siblings. That in particular is how the church is being asked to bear witness in this time in history. But part of that call asks us to look at issues of power and privilege and change. Those don't always come easy. Sometimes it can come with a sense of loss. No, change isn't always easy. And in all of this, there needs to be a space to make mistakes, for some patience. An important part of knowing and telling that story includes those times when forgiveness is necessary, those times when we don't always live up to our own ideals, forgiveness for others, and maybe most of all, forgiveness for ourselves when we fall short of our own ideals. Being in covenant for ministers, for congregants, for the whole congregation, asks us to make space for all of that too. Churches, I have learned, maybe you have too, are very human institutions, and we don't always bring our best selves to the effort. But amazingly, I have to say that all too often, we do seem to manage that. Hopefully out of that covenant can come a trust that allows all of us to open as individuals, and yes, as a community too. There can be in all of this a kind of grace, as more and more we might be able to see our own lives in the lives of others, seeing that our destinies really are tied together, that so often one oppression intersects with another, and how part of the spiritual task, the covenant asks us to hold all of that, all of those threads together, to understand that oppression in its many forms harms all of us. It's about seeing that our individual lives and all the parts of our identity, all that we bring, are welcomed and valued. Each of our stories is part of that larger story, that larger narrative of our times. I'm mindful of that whenever I find myself preaching or praying. It all comes out of that ongoing conversation, that ongoing covenant. One of the hardest things in this COVID time has been not being together in the ways that we've been used to being together. Here together in this sanctuary, I really miss the face-to-face conversations. Yes, there are Zoom chats and phone calls, but what I miss are those short conversations after church out there in the narthex, little check-ins, this comment or that comment, hearing about whatever it is going on in someone's life, maybe an exchange that simply says, I see you. Maybe that's really what is at the heart of the covenant we share, a commitment to see each, to bear witness to each other. Most of all, now, and it's going to be important too in these days ahead. The times we are in continue to feel so uncertain. Any illusion we had of going back to some kind of normal somehow now seems to be long gone. Now the questions are more just what the contour of life will be. Just how have our lives been reshaped, and how will they continue to be reshaped? There are things we know, but there's so much that we don't know. How is it that we are to live with all of this uncertainty? Words again of the poet. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Through these times of uncertainty, through these times of peril, through these times of possibility and hope, may we know always that we are part of that family of things. May we know we are not alone. May we keep in mind that vision of a beloved community that will never, ever let us go. So be it on this day, good people. Amen. Will you pray with me now? Spirit of life and of love, God of many names and no name at all, hear our prayers. Be with us, Spirit, in these times that should trouble us all. Call us to say no once again to hatred, to all that would hold some of us, but ultimately all of us back. May we see in our coming together a path forward, and may we see ourselves on this journey together. Grant us courage, grant us wisdom, grant us perseverance, and through it all call us to love, that we might build that beloved community and that it might help all of us together to find our way home. Amen. Let us join together now and sing our closing hymn, Immortal Love.
Free.
as you go forth into this day, into this new week, may you be held in that promise of that never-ending love. May that be our promise. May that be our prayer. This is the day we've been given. Let us rejoice in it and be glad. Go in peace. Practice love. Amen.